Cool. Okay, we are holding in Shabbos. Perches Mishna Gimel.
Oh, that's not Ches. Ches Gimel. Okay. So the measure that determines liability for carrying out animal hide is equivalent to that which is used to make an amulet. The measure that determines liability for carrying out duk sosos. Mine doesn't translate it. Oh, a layer of animal hide. A layer of the animal hide, I guess, is equivalent to that which is used to write a mezuzah. Oh, like parchment.
Yes, klaf is a parchment.
The measure that determines liability for carrying out parchment. So I guess paper. No.
Well,
I don't know.
Parchment is not the same as paper. Parchment is animal hide.
So there's one type that is equivalent to writing mezuzah. Then there's a different type of parchment, which is used to write the shortest portion of the tefillin, which is Shema.
Where do you see mezuzah?
I don't know. My English has it. Let me see my Hebrew. Or klaf. That is bizarre. That my English adds a whole thing because I'm seeing here klaf kadei lichtov alav parshat ketana tefillin. It doesn't talk about mezuzah.
Yeah.
Where is my English getting that from? Anyway, that's an exploration for another day. Mm-hmm. So forget all that about mezuzah. That's just somebody trying to sneak something into the English. Maybe it's in the Gemara or something. I don't know. Okay, so the parchment that is to write the shortest portion, which is Shema. Ink is equivalent to that which is used to write 2 letters, and for eyeshadow, the equivalent of the amount used to paint 1 eye. I'm nervous about my translation now. All right, the measure for carrying out glue is equivalent to that which is used to place on top of a board to catch birds. The measure that determines liability for carrying out tar and sulfur is equivalent to that which is used to seal a hole in a vessel. There was some debate here. My translation says to seal a hole in a vessel and to make a small hole in that seal. But I think your explanation was it's maybe one or the other.
Yeah, the two different explanations on it according to there was a Rashi versus Meiri.
Okay. The measure that determines liability for carrying out wax is equivalent to the amount used to place on the opening of a small hole. The measure that determines liability for carrying out crushed earthenware is equivalent to the amount used to knead and make an opening for the bellows to be placed in a gold refiner's crucible. Rabbi Yehuda says equivalent to the amount used to make a small tripod for the crucible. The measure that determines liability for carrying out bran is equivalent to that which is used to place in the hole of a gold refiner's crucible. For the amount for lime is equivalent to the amount used to spread on the smallest girls, I guess as some sort of a hair removal or loosening tool. I looked it up. It came up as taxidermists, which was a little creepy in this context, but I guess it loosens hairs. Rabbi Yehuda says equivalent to that which is used to spread on the hair of the temple, perhaps so it'll lay flat. Rabbi Nehemiah says equivalent also to spread on the temple, but maybe my translation says to remove the hairs rather than to lay them flat, which perhaps is a little bit more. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Okay. The measure that determines liability for carrying out earth on Shabbos is equivalent to the seal of large sacks, which is a pretty big amount. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. The rabbi said the measure is much smaller, which is equivalent to the seal of letters. The amount for carrying out manure and fine sand is equivalent to that which is used to fertilize one stalk of cabbage. This is Rabbi Akiva. The rabbis say it's equivalent to the amount used to fertilize a leek, which is less. The measure that determines liability for carrying out coarse sand is equivalent to that which is used to place on a full spoon of plaster. The measure that determines liability for carrying out a reed is equivalent to that which is used to make a quill. And if it's too thick, or if it was fragmented, kind of broken, it's the amount equivalent to use to cook an egg that's egg most easily, which is like beaten up and placed in a stew pot. Like
that's a very minimal shear in terms of soft cooking an egg that's in an already warmed up pot. Okay.
But you're using it as a utensil to help do that, right?
Well, what are you looking at? You're looking at reeds. That means you're looking at the reeds that are too thick to be used as a quill.
Right.
So therefore, we're looking at them as fuel.
As fuel. Okay. Yeah, so just a little tiny amount of heat. You don't need much. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay. Mishna Vav. Etzim, a bone. If the shear to be chayav for hatzah is enough to make a tarvad, which is a spoon. So if it's a big enough bone that you could make a spoon out of it, then that is then you'd be chayav for carrying that into the Rosh Hashanah. Eliezer's timing is impeccable.
What happened?
You've arrived just in time for the new Mishnayos.
Oh, great! Thank you.
Okay, so we're in Chesvav. So the bone we said is the shear is enough to make a spoon. He says enough to make the tooth of a key. Keys, the technology of keys in those days existed, but it was nowhere near like what we have now. You'd have a shaft and you'd be able to put little pins into the key, and you could use bone to make a piece of that key. So Rabbi Yehuda decreases the shear quite significantly by saying if you have enough bone in there to make a fitting inside a key, to make a pin inside a key, that would be sufficient to be chayav on. Glass kadei ligror bol rosh karkar, enough to or karkar. What is it? It's like the eye of a needle of it's like a needle of wood. With which he straightens the weaving, or it's chessi. The chessi is the warp. So when you're laying out the threads of the warp on the loom, you use this kli called a karkar in order to straighten all of the threads. Okay, so sometimes they would sharpen it with the piece. They would sharpen the top of this kli with a piece of glass. Shards of glass are sharp. Okay, so if it's enough glass there to sharpen that kli that you use to straighten the warp of the loom, then that you'd be fine for carrying on Shabbos. Shror or even if like any kinds of little rocks, kedeli's rock off enough that you would use to scare away birds from your field, to throw stones at the birds to get them away. So if they're big enough for that, you're fine for carrying. Rabbi Eliezer ber Yaakov omer kedeli's rock behema. So there's not a bird of behema. You need a bigger stone to be significant, so that a cow would notice if you threw at it. Yeah. Mishna Zayin Cheres is earthenware. So it's a shard of earthenware, not a kli itself. Obviously, the kli itself you'd be chayav on if there's a proper kli, but a shard of earthenware. As long as it's big enough to put as a wedge between patzim, the word is Kati explains is a column or a beam. Okay, and they would use these things as a wedge or as a little spacer in between the columns or the beams. So if you have a little piece of earthenware, so I don't know if you've seen when they lay down tiles on the floor, they've got those little plastic X's that they put in between to keep the right spacing. So think of that in terms of the cheres. If it's big enough to be used to wedge apart the boards or the columns in a building. Rabbi Yehuda. So this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer kedei lachtos bo es ha'or, enough to use as a fan to fan the flames. So it's got to be that sounds to me like it's a little bigger than Rabbi Yehuda's share. Rabbi Yossi Omer kedei lekabel bo revi'is, if it's curved enough that you could hold a revi'is of liquid. He's not interested in this fanning or in the using as a wedge. It's got to be a kli. Amar Rabbi Meir, af al pi she'en raya ledavar ze'ech ledavar. He says, I don't have a proof for it, but there's a hint to it in the psukim in Yeshayahu. V'lo yimatzei b'mechita soy cheres lachtos eish miyakud. There's a passage that mentions that that you can use a cheres to as a fan to stir up the fire. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi misham raya. You got a raya from that. It says v'lach sof mayim migeve. It also says in the same pasuk v'lach sof mayim migeve in order to spoon up water from the pit. Right. Because the pasuk talks about the water that's gathered together in the pit, and therefore there's also chashivas into a cheres if you can gather water in it in a significant amount, which Rabbi Yossi says is a revi'is.
Wouldn't that indicate that they're the same size?
Interesting question. Now that you mention it, I wonder.
Yeah.
Halacha follows Rabbi Yossi that it's enough to hold that it could hold a revi'is of liquid. Okay. No, interesting. They used to also use a cheres as post-it notes.
I'm sorry, as what?
Mhm.
They used to use cheres as post-it notes.
Oh.
You would have a little. If you had broken earthenware, you'd use it to write a little note to yourself and or to somebody else.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the guy who made post-it notes doesn't really deserve the royalty.
Well, they didn't stick, so you must, to be fair. Okay. Periktes. Amar Rabbi Akiva minayin la'avodah zarah shemetam'a b'masa kanida. Okay. So why are we even asking this question? What's it got to do with Shabbos? So Gati explains in the introduction that because since we finished the previous Mishnah, Barosh Arba Mishnahs Kovetz Mamarim. So it's a bunch of Mamarim. So since we finished with Psukim from Yeshayahu in Perik Lamed, so we take a little diversion over here into drashas from Psukim. So Rabbi Akiva says, how do you know that avodah zarah is matame when you carry it, just like a nida? So if you carry a nida, you become tame from carrying the nida because she's matame midras. So the same thing goes for if you carry avodah zarah. If you carry an idol, even if you don't touch it, then you become tame from it. Shneimar tizreim kamo davar tzei tomar lo. Says the pasuk. It's you should. Tizraim is to scatter them like a modava. Have I translated it correctly? What's your word for? Is it scatter?
Cast them away.
Cast them away.
Same
like
idea.
Modava. Dava is like a nida. We have the word dava is used also in the context of nida. Say tomar lo. Go out. Say to him. Okay, man nida matama banat b'masa, just like a nida is matama when you carry her. Af avodah zarah matama b'masa. So similarly, we learn that by carrying avodah zarah you become tame. And after all that drasha, the halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva, and avodah zarah is not matama b'masa. Okay, Chazar Daled Beis.
We may insulate hot food with pelts, and we may move them with wool shearings, but we may not but we may not move them. What should one do? He removes the lid and they fall. The Elazar ben Azariah says he tilts the box on one side and removes the food lest he remove the pot and be unable to replace it. But the Chachamim say he may remove it and replace it. If he did not cover it when it was yet day, he may not cover it after dark. If he covered it and it became uncovered, he may cover it. One may fill a bottle and place it under a cushion or under a bolster.
With what may an animal go out into the public domain on Shabbos, and with what may it not go out? A camel can go out with a afsar and a naka, with a hatam and a luvdekim.
No. Luvdekim is a kind of an animal.
Oh, luvdekim. Okay. Mine's not translating it, so I got confused. Okay, a camel can go out with an afsar, and a naka, whatever a naka is
the rope that you tie to its cheeks and pull it from the harness around its head.
Okay, this animal called a naka.
A naka is a nursing camel.
Nursing camel can go out with a hatam,
with his nose ring.
A nose ring. A luvdekim.
So these are Libyan asses.
All right. May go out with a perumbia.
Right, which is a harness of metal.
Okay. Oh, yeah, my note says all these things are defined in the Gemara. A horse can go out with a chain around its neck. And in general, all animals that typically have a chain around their necks when they go out into the public domain may go out with a chain on Shabbos and may be pulled by the chain. If these chains contracted tuma, one may sprinkle water, the water of purification on them and immerse them in their place on the animal. And they need not
so you can just lead the animal into a river and dunk it under, and the kalim become tahor.
Yeah, convenient.
A donkey may go out with a saddle cloth when it is tied to it. Rams may go out strapped. Ewes may go out exposed, tied, or covered up. She-goats may go out with the udders tied. Rabbi Yossi forbids all of them except the ewes covered up. Rabbi Yehuda says she-goats may go out with the udders tied to dry up, but not for milk. Okay.
Orla, base aleph.
Wait a second. Oh, okay. Base aleph. Okay. Truma Maisra of the Mai, Chala, or Koram are voided in 101 and combined with one another, and one must take off. Orla and Khalil Hakarim are voided in 201, combined with one another, and one need not take off. Reb Shimon says they do not combine, but Reb Eliezer says they combine when imparting a flavor, but not to forbid. Can you explain that a little better than I said it?
So they join. They join to each other. Mitzarfim ben nosin tam. So I'm just going to read the Kahati explanation of it here. If they joined, if they were combined inside some sort of mixture of heter, so then they join together in order to answer the thing with taste, right? Because if the heter doesn't have enough to be mevatel the taste of both of them, then it all becomes aser. But if they got mixed together in dry, and in other words, there's no taste involved. It's just a question of bittul. If there's no 200 against both of them, they don't join together to make the 1 and 200 against them. So if you have dry items, normally, like for dry items, you need a shear of 200 against them. It's not about taste. When you talk about 200, it's not about taste. Taste, we go by the rule of thumb of 60.
Right.
Okay. So when you have taste, there's nothing you can do about the taste. If there's a taste of Isser in it, then there's a problem. But if you're talking about dry, you're not worried about taste. You're worried about is has it made the technical definition of 1 in 200 or not? And the two different categories of Isser don't join together to make that 1 against the 200. So if each one is a half, and there's 200 of heter against them, then it's all fine.
Okay.
As long as they're not actually mixed together in a wet mixture.
Thank you.
Sure.
What's our spot again? Just
Base.
Truma can void Orla, and Orla can void Truma. How? For instance, a seah of Truma fell into 100, and afterwards 3 cobs of Orla, or 3 cobs of mixed seeds from the vineyard fell in. This is an instance where the Truma goes towards neutralizing the Orla, and Orla, Truma.
Because when the Truma fell in, and there was enough to be Mavatal the Truma, and now it falls in a small amount of Orla, which before the Truma fell in, it wouldn't have had, the Chulin wouldn't have had enough to be Mavatal it. But now that the Truma's fallen in, it adds to the shear of Heter. That's now Mavatal the Orla.
Cool.
Okay. Orla voids Kalayim, and Kalayim Orla, and Orla. How so? If a Sah of Orla fell into 200, and then a little more than a Sah of Orla, and a little more of a Sah of Hillel, Kalai Hacharim fell in. This is when Orla voids Kalayim, and Kalayim voids Orla, and Orla.
So it's the same principle over here, where there was bittul the first time, and now the extra shear, the extra isser. I mean, it's a very, very small window you're talking about, where it's like an extra, like 1/200th that falls in the previous case in order for it to make a nafkamina. But basically, what the Mishna is proving is demonstrating over here is that once you've had bittul, then the isser has become heter. As long as you've had, and that's an important point, is that you have to have had a yediyah in between, that you actually have to have noticed that the isser fell in, so that you can have the bittul. Because if a small amount of Isser falls in, and then another amount of Isser falls in, but you didn't notice in between, then it's counted as one amount of Isser fell in at once by the time you noticed, and then there's no bittul. Then the two combine together in order to when you pass the halacha. So the person's knowledge is actually really critical to the halacha. Your knowledge of when the Isser fell in is critical to determining whether or not there's bittul.
Okay.
Interesting that the halach can be determined according to your knowledge of the situation. It's the same physical mechanism. The same isser fell into the same heter, but depending on when you realized, it changes the halacha completely.
Cool.
Okay, Shvius Cheshai.
One may not give a well digger, a bath attendant, or a barber or sailor, but one may give a well digger to drink, and to all one may give as a gift.
Okay. Sabbatical figs may not be cut in the muktzeh.
The muktzeh is the field. It's an area where you put out the figs to dry.
Okay. But he may cut them in an open place, I guess, because it doesn't look like you're actually doing work. You're just cutting your figs.
Because what you want to avoid is the appearance of industry out of the produce. If you're doing it for personal use, that's fine. But if it looks like you're preparing them for market, not so good.
Cool. So that makes sense for the rest of this. Grapes may not be trodden on in the wine press, but you can step on them in a kneading trough. Again, personal use. Olives may not be prepared in the olive press or in a small olive press, but you may crush them and bring them into a small olive press in the field. Rabbi Shimon says they may even be crushed in the larger olive presses, and he brings them into the smaller press.
Technical question. This word muktzeh here, how is it spelled differently when we use muktzeh as?
It's the same word.
Same word. Okay.
Muktzeh means set aside.
Okay. All
The
right.
katzeh is the end.
Right.
So
Okay.
muktzeh means it's been set aside. So that's the meaning of things that are muktzeh on Shabbos, is that they're set aside. They're not for you to touch. And the muktzeh is where you set aside the figs in order to dry them.
Otherwise, there's always one letter or something that changes it. So I'm always asking.
Yeah. These are good questions. It's a very good. It's a great thing to be able to understand the shorish of the word, and see how they're connected, because that's the thing about Hebrew. There's no coincidence about when two words have got the same shoresh.
Right. Okay. One may not cook seventh-year vegetables in truma oil lest he cause it to become unfit. Reb Shimon permits, and the last one becomes liable to the seventh year, and the produce itself is forbidden.
Right. So that last sentence is unconnected to the rest of the Mishnah. It's just saying that when you're trading, when you're bartering or selling Shemitah produce, which is legitimate for small amounts, like you went out into the field and harvested a bunch of stuff, and you got more than you needed, so you want and your neighbor wants to buy it off you. That's fine, but the money then takes on kedusha shvius. So then, if you go into the store and buy chicken with that money, then that chicken gets kedusha shvius.
Yes.
So even though a chicken, like you don't have a Shemitah chicken, but you have a Shemitah chicken, but the money then becomes chulin. If you subsequently barter this chicken for something else, then what you bartered it for now takes on kedusha shvius. Okay, but the original produce never loses it. And that's what the Mishnah is always saying. The pre-atmo asra, the pre itself, always retains kedusha shvius. But the money, whatever gets bartered, every time you swap it, the thing that you swap it for takes on kedusha shvius.
Does that have anything to do with the fact that there's something about in the organizations, for Shemitah, that you don't use money, you use these coupons or something like that because you don't want to, bring the kedusha onto them?
Not exactly. That's not exactly the mechanism. I'm seeing is you're asking. I've also signed up for one of these things, and they're going to send me, a bunch of vouchers that I'm going to trade in at Best Market for the produce that they've got on the shelves there. But it's one of those things that you've got to, actually, that's probably right. Actually, now that you're saying it, I'm thinking. Now that I think about it, you may be right that if you buy produce with those vouchers, then you don't have to worry about the money turning into kedusha shvius, which gets a little bit tricky when Best Market is selling the otza based in produce. Like, how do you come up with money for the otza based in produce? Then they've got to worry about that money having kedusha shvius themselves. How does that work when you're paying by credit card?
I know
you're getting into a minefield here.
If you pay with, if they give you change, then that change, I think, has
no. The change is definitely not what's got the kedusha shvius, because that's coming on the same side as the shvius produce. But if in a classic situation, if I went to the otza based in and I handed over a 10 shekel coin for a bag of produce, then that 10 shekel coin now has kedusha shvius. Whereas if I hand over a voucher, that's just saying that you owed me this money anyway, because you owed me this fruit anyway, because I paid for it. I paid for the farmer's work up front, and I'm actually not buying the produce. There's another thing about otza based in, is that otza based in is the produce is free, but what you're paying the based in for is for the work that it took to go through. So you're not actually selling the fruit. I think that's probably what they're working with, is that when they're selling the otza based in, they're not selling the fruit. The fruit is free fruit, but pay for the labor that it took us to get it to you.
So you give them a certain amount of money a month or a week, or?
Yes, a month.
A month. And how do you decide how much you need? That's a good question.
You make up whatever you want. I don't know what it is, but I didn't feel like having a bunch of vouchers, because vouchers are notorious for getting lost.
And what if you have left over for that month? It doesn't matter.
You can carry it over to the next month.
Carry it over. I haven't decided what to do this year. I haven't decided yet. I have to do it soon, I guess.
Yeah, you should. You should sign up for otza based in as soon as possible.
Right. I know. I have to figure out. Okay.
All right. Hey, Taurus base. Hey.
The Rishon, Sheni, and Shlishi of sacrificial foods are tamei and contaminate with tuma. The Revi disqualifies but does not contaminate with tuma, and the Chamishi may be eaten in a dish containing sacrificial food.
Base hay, you said? Now we're on base.
Base vav.
Vav. Okay. Second degree tuma in common foods conveys uncleanliness to unconsecrated liquids and causes invalidity to truma. So it apostles the truma. Third degree tuma in truma conveys uncleanliness to consecrated liquids and causes invalidity to holy foods, food that was prepared in conditions of cleanliness appropriate for holy food. There's probably an easier way to say this. But if it was only prepared under conditions of cleanliness appropriate for truma, it conveys uncleanliness at a first and second, and at a second remove, and causes invalidity to holy foods at one additional remove. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so we're saying, okay, so let's just take the case again. A shlishi of truma. So truma can become tamei up until the third degree.
Yes.
Okay. So we said it's metame mashke kodesh. So kodesh liquids can become tamei from it, and it's uposel le'ochle kodesh. And if somebody who wanted to eat kodesh touch such way le'ochelim. So and it also puzzles the if you have let's say shlamim food, shlamim meat, if it comes into contact with tamei truma, then it also becomes puzzle. Shenasu letaras hakodesh, if it is made shenasu letaras hakodesh. מה שאמרנו לשליש של תשומה פוסל אופק קודש ואינו מטעם זה דווקא יש התשומה שנעשה אחרי כשלישי של קודש העושה רביעי בקודש. Okay. That's if the truma was made. If the truma was made al taras kodesh, if you have that chumrah of keeping your truma on the tara level of kodshim, because normally truma doesn't become tamei as a shlishi, it just becomes pasul as a shlishi. So how does it become tamei? Because if you're keeping this chumrah. Well, in nasul taras truma, if it was just made for regular truma, the tamei shnaim, it can only become tamei to the second degree of posel echad kodesh. And if it comes into contact with kodesh, then the kodesh becomes pasul.
Okay.
Reb Eliezer says, is it you have Reb Eliezer?
Yeah, Lazar.
I have Eliezer. All right, Reb Eliezer says the three of them are equal. The rishon of sacrificial things, truma and chulin, conveys truma to two and disqualifies one with regard to sacrificial things. It conveys truma to one and disqualifies one with regard to truma, and it disqualifies chulin. The sheni of all of them conveys truma to one and disqualifies one with sacrificial things. It conveys truma to chulin liquids and disqualifies truma foods. The shalishi of all of them conveys truma to sacrificial liquids and disqualifies sacrificial foods.
Right. Nafchos space gimel.
The Todah offering renders the bread pigul, but the bread does not render the Todah offering pigul. How so? If one slaughters the Todah offering intending to eat from it tomorrow, both it and the bread become pigul. However, if it intended to eat from the bread tomorrow, the bread becomes pigul, but the Todah offering does not become pigul. The lambs render the bread pigul, but the bread does not render the lambs pigul. How so? If one slaughters the lambs intending to eat it from then tomorrow, both they and the bread become pigul. However, if he intended to eat from the bread tomorrow, the bread becomes pigul, but the lambs do not become pigul.
So what you see from here is the ikar korban is the lambs, and if you have a pigul intention for the lambs, then the thing that's secondary to it also becomes pigul. But if he just has a pigul intention on the bread, and only the bread becomes pigul, it doesn't drag the lambs with them.
Okay.
Okay. The animal offering renders the accompanying libations and meal offerings pigul from the moment that they were consecrated in the vessels, but not before. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. The libations do not render the animal offerings pigul. How? In the case of one who slaughters the offering with the intent to partake of it the next day, the offering and its libations are rendered pigul. But if one slaughters the offering with the intent to sacrifice its libation the next day, the libations are a pigul, while the offering is not.
Okay. Right?
Hey, go on.
Hey. If he intended to pickle with the chumetz but did not with the frankincense, or with the frankincense but not with the chumetz, Reb Meir says it is pickle and one is liable to karas over it. But the Chachamim say there is no karas for it unless he intends pickle with all of that remembers it permissible. The Chachamim concur with Reb Meir concerning the sinner's mincha offering and the jealousy mincha offering, that if he intended pickle with the chumetz, it is pickle and one is liable to karas over it, since the chumetz is that which renders it permissible. If he slaughtered one of the lambs intending to eat the 2 loaves tomorrow, or he burnt one of the spoonfuls of frankincense intending to eat the 2 arrangements tomorrow, Reb Meir says it is pickle, and one is liable to karas over it. But the Chachamim say there is no pickle unless he intends pickle with all that renders it permissible. If he slaughtered one of the lambs intending to eat from it tomorrow, it is pickle, but the companion is valid. However, if he intended to eat from its companion tomorrow, they're both valid. Okay. And Nadarim.
Gimel.
If he prohibited the preserved food, he is forbidden only preserved vegetables. Preserved food, with respect to my tasting, he is forbidden all preserved food. The seethed food, he is forbidden with only seethed meat. For seethed food, with respect to my tasting, he is forbidden all seethed foods. The roast, he is forbidden only roasted meat. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda.
I didn't get that word that you're using to translate shnakim. What kind of food?
The one, the seethed, S-E-E-T-H-E-D.
Seethed. Okay. Interesting.
No. He is forbidden all seethed foods. The roast, he is forbidden only roasted meat. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. With roast, with respect to my tasting, he is forbidden all roasted food. The salted food, he is forbidden only salted fish. Salted food, with respect to my tasting, he is forbidden all salted foods. A little confusing, but a lot confusing.
The subtleties in the Hebrew language, yeah.
Yeah. If one says fish or fishes are going on for me, that reason I will not taste them, he's prohibited from eating all of them, whether large or small, whether salted or unsalted, whether raw or cooked, no sushi. But he is permitted to taste minced sardines and to taste fish brine, as these are not included in the common meaning of the word fish. One who vows that tzahana, a concoction of whole and chopped fish, that sounds gross, is forbidden to him. He is prohibited from eating minced sardines as well, because that's part of it. But he is permitted to eat fish brine and fish gravy. One who vows that minced sardines are forbidden to him is prohibited from eating fish brine and from eating fish gravy.
Did you like that one?
Yeah.
That sounds horrible.
You don't like fish?
I'm not a big fish fan, and fish derivatives even less, probably.
I like fish, but that's all right. One who makes a net of prohibiting the milk is permitted whey. Reb Yossi, however, forbids it. The way he is permitted milk. Abba Shaul says one who makes a net of prohibiting the cheese is forbidden it, whether it is salted or unsalted. Right.
Well,
Saul, I have a question for you. Can you see this?
yes, Mr. Otzar, yeah.
Now that's different than what you were doing.
That's Maser Mehudar. That's right. So that's something about Maser. I don't know. Is that about? It doesn't say. I don't see anything there about Shvius. But yeah, I have a membership at that Nachon Torah Haaretz.
I have another thing also. I get these things in the mail.